come out of lockdown and life is slowly moving towards what we now know as the new normal, we're faced with the issue of how people's mental health has been affected by so many weeks of being under lockdown. Let's break this down with Mbali Mashaba. She's a registered councillor. Mbali, a very good morning. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Nelly.
Mbali, let's talk about how COVID-19 has affected us as communities and our normal daily routines.
So COVID came at a time when we were not expecting it at all. I think the time when it came into the country and the country's consciousness was at a time where we were all already starting to think about our goals. It was the beginning of the year. We had high hopes for the year that we were going into. So when COVID came in, it hit and we suddenly had to change the way that we see things. We had to change the way that we do things, and we had to change the way that we think. And that became a big struggle for us. I think as a country, as a world, the pandemic hit us at such a stage where things were changing. We've all now been in this collective form of trauma. We all are now being suddenly experiencing anxieties about our lives, about our futures. And we also now have to deal with grief in a way that is not normal to what we usually do.
Yeah.
And so now, this is what COVID has done to us as a nation and essentially as a world.
And Mbali, with the people that you've been dealing with in your line of work, what are some of those, symptoms or effects that you've had to deal with and probably take people through during this time?
So a very big thing that we've had to take our clients through is dealing with the anxiety of having to work through what is going to happen. So people are anxious about their work, they're anxious about their social lives, they're anxious about their health, they're anxious about what is going to happen. And as human beings, when we don't know what's going to happen, that's when our anxiety grows even more. And the most anxiety provoking thing about COVID is that it's fairly new. We don't know about this virus. We don't know where it comes from and how to make it go away. So anxiety is one of the biggest things. The second thing that we've had to help people deal with is the trauma of this whole situation. So I know a lot of the times people feel that trauma has to do with a break into your house or has to do with abuse or anything like that. But trauma essentially is defined as a sudden life-changing event. So that can be anything from winning your lottery, from gaining a large sum of money that you haven't really worked for, you haven't expected to come in, to now having to deal with this change of how we have to live every day. So trauma is one of the big things that we've also had to deal with. So people needing to deal with how has this all changed now in our lives, but also additionally dealing with the traumas of what's going on at home. Because as we know, abuse has gone up, substance abuse has gone up, and so now people are dealing with that.
And I mean, you're speaking about such important things, Mbali, in terms of having to adjust to certain things. One of the things that have happened during the lockdown is the ban of cigarettes, the ban on the sale of alcohol as well. When you're looking at the situation now that we're on level 2 and those things and the sale of alcohol, for instance, and the sale of cigarettes have been unbanned, when you're looking at it, as South Africans, were we prepared for an instance of this nature where the things that we are used to, some of them that have become habits, some of them that we are addicted to, were taken away from us for a moment, and then now suddenly we have access to them? Were we prepared mentally for this kind of a situation?
So I don't believe that as a country we were fully prepared for what was going to happen. I think we were prepared for not going to our friends, even though we are a very social country, we were prepared for that and we found ways to go around it. The same thing with the sale of alcohol, cigarettes, tobacco products. We then started to struggle because now, instead of getting it from a place in a legal way, that was maybe helping me, for example, to deal with an anxiety or a mental health disorder that I'm suffering from, now I have to find other ways to go through it, especially thinking about how in South Africa we already have a bit of a disparity in people being able to find services that can help them with mental health issues. This now lockdown caused us to have an even bigger problem. So now people were either forced into detox when they were not ready for it, and they were not given skills or tools like going to a psychologist or speaking to a counselor who can help them through it, or they were gone through forced to now make use of the black market, and that then creates this bigger issue in the country and in the economy. And now we're going to, of course, go back to using our substances, but of course we're going to, some people will make use of it more than what they actually were before lockdown happened.
One of the other things, Mbali, that people have had to go back to is earlier in the week where learners who, some of them had not been to school since March, when the lockdown actually began, have had to return to school. What would your advice be to parents who are now having to let go of their kids and allowing them to once again go back into an environment that has a lot of people in it? And I would imagine there's a lot of anxiety around that as well, because it has been 5 months of no interaction for some of those learners. So what would your advice be to the parents themselves who, one, are having to let go, but also how do they then, help their children through this time of going back to school, going back to a new normal, so to say?
So I think the really important thing for parents as well as everybody else going back into society is to always think of things in a positive way, to narrate it or frame it in a way that is positive. So yes, we're going into this big dangerous situation where we possibly could bump into a lot of people and possibly get infected with COVID virus. But the steps that we need to take, especially for the parents in this instance, prepare your children to go back to school. So making sure that they understand what hygiene practices are, making sure that they always have their sanitizer with them, and sometimes, doing a little song with them to say, before they leave the house, make sure, do I have my mask? Do I have my sanitizer? Do I have just my juice so I'm not sharing with everybody else? Is it labeled to ensure that other children are not making use of that? And even if it does happen, because it will probably happen as a mistake that another child uses your child's juice bottle, explaining to them that if it happens that somebody shares or uses your things, don't make use of it. Speak to the nearest trustworthy adult, which would be your teacher. Let them know what's happened with your personal things, and then possibly try find a way to wash it and sanitize it and make use of something different so that they're not sharing those objects. But as human beings, always being able to prepare for what could happen always helps us. And that's also framing the situation a bit in a more positive way, as opposed to thinking about all the things that could go wrong, thinking about how can my reaction to this make this less dangerous and less scary.
Mbali, great advice as usual. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Mbali Mashaba, registered councillor